My father forbade me to talk to my grandfather. A few days later, my grandfather called me back and said, "My heir is you." My name is Amelia Hayes, but since I was a little girl, my grandfather Arthur has called me Amy. I am 30 years old, and my life is filled with colors, drawings, and creative ideas flying around in my small but inspiring studio apartment in Brooklyn, New York. I am a freelance artist, making a living from graphic design contracts, magazine illustrations, and the occasional personal sale to like-minded art collectors. Life is not always easy. Sometimes I struggle with rent and the high cost of living in the city, but I love the freedom, love the passion to pursue my chosen artistic path. Only that path never met with the approval of my father, Robert Hayes. My relationship with him was as tense as a string about to snap. My father, a man in his late 60s who owned a small antique shop in his hometown, a quiet town far from the hustle and bustle of New York, had always considered my career choice a vagabond, unstable, a disappointment. He wanted me to pursue a more realistic career, with a pension and full health insurance, like other people's children. In contrast to my father, my grandfather Arthur was the only person in my family who truly understood and supported me unconditionally. He was a successful businessman who retired at the age of 80, who had built a respectable business with his own hands, but he had a very open and modern outlook. He loved my paintings, listened to my somewhat crazy ideas about contemporary art, and never judged me. He was my spiritual support, an endless source of inspiration. But it was that special relationship between me and my grandfather that became a thorn in my father's side, the source of countless arguments in the family. And the climax of that tension happened about 2 weeks ago, in a phone call that I will never forget. The immediate cause was probably my father discovering that my grandfather had secretly funded a small sum of money for me to participate in a group art exhibition in Chelsea. To me, it was a great opportunity. To my father, it was an unreasonable indulgence by my grandfather, and further evidence of my uselessness. From today on, I forbid you from going near your grandfather again. My father's voice hissed over the phone, so angry and spiteful that I could feel the trembling in his every word. He has ruined this family enough. He always defends you, spoiling you. If you dare to contact him again, even if it's just a phone call, don't blame me for disowning you. Then he hung up. A sudden, heavy silence fell over me. No further explanation. No opportunity for me to argue. Just an authoritarian imposition and a harsh threat. I sat on the old sofa in my apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear. My grandfather was my dearest, my only confidant in this family. And now my father, who had never tried to understand me, wanted to use his parental authority to sever that precious bond. I felt torn in two. An overwhelming pain and helplessness invaded my soul. My relationship with my grandfather Arthur was always something special, an oasis of peace amid the constant tension with my parents. I remember the times he traveled from his hometown to New York to visit me. My small studio apartment suddenly felt warmer and more bustling. He never complained about my cramped living space or my free lifestyle. Instead, he would enthusiastically look at my unfinished paintings, the sketches of ideas scattered on the floor. He praised my color palette, analyzed my bold lines, and listened to me talk passionately about new art projects, the crazy ideas that I had not dared to share with anyone. He was my most loyal audience, my most astute critic, and my most ardent supporter. That understanding and appreciation was in stark contrast to my father's attitude. Robert was a conservative, pragmatic man. His small antique shop was failing because it refused to adapt to modern tastes and business practices. He always considered art a luxury, something that was not worth real life. He could not understand why I had turned down a stable office job with a decent salary after graduating from college. I studied art history, another option that disappointed him, to pursue this precarious path as a freelance artist. Every small success I had in art was overlooked by him, or worse, mocked as lucky. The conflict between my father and my grandfather Arthur was not limited to differences in how they viewed me. It stemmed from deeper rifts, from disagreements in the past that I only vaguely sensed in the rare but heated arguments between the two men. Perhaps it was a difference in business philosophy. Arthur's grandfather had built a fairly large consumer goods manufacturing and distribution corporation before retiring, based on his acumen, foresight, and ability to take calculated risks. My father, meanwhile, stubbornly clung to his increasingly outdated antique shop, resisting any change, any idea of modernization. He always felt inferior, always standing in his father's shadow, and that turned into resentment and irritability. It could also be a matter of inheritance in the past. I heard vaguely that when my grandfather decided to retire and hand over the management of the company, he did not give the entire business to my father alone, but shared the shares and responsibilities with my father's siblings. Or perhaps he set management conditions, development goals that my father felt imposed on and was not satisfied with. And perhaps the deepest cause was jealousy. My father may have been jealous of his father's outstanding success. And perhaps he was even more jealous of the special affection and understanding that my grandfather had for me. His misfit granddaughter, who pursued a career in painting, an affection that he felt he had never fully received from his father. He considered the closeness and intimacy between me and my grandfather as a hidden betrayal, an alliance formed to oppose the values and desires that he pursued. I've always tried to be a good son and grandchild. I tried to act as a bridge, to ease the invisible tension between my father and my grandfather. Every time I visited home, I tried to divide my time and attention equally between the two sides. I listened to my father's complaints about the difficult business, about my grandfather's rigidity. Then I spent hours talking to my grandfather, sharing about life in New York, about my new art projects. But my efforts were often thwarted by my father. He would criticize and mock my grandfather's advice to me as old-fashioned thinking. He made increasingly unreasonable demands to control my relationship with him, from limiting the number of times I called him to interrogating me about the content of our conversations. And the heated argument that led to the ban on contact with my grandfather was the last straw. My grandfather's sponsorship of my exhibition, though only a small sum compared to his fortune, became an excuse for my father to explode with anger that had been accumulating for so long. He thought that my grandfather was deliberately trying to buy me, dividing the family's feelings. The days after my father's ban passed in a heavy and anxious atmosphere. Although I was very sad and angry at first, I tried to comply with his request. Partly because the shock was so great that I did not know how to react. Partly because I did not want to make the situation more tense, did not want to push the already fragile relationship with my father to the brink of complete breakdown. And perhaps a small part of me still hoped that, after his anger, my father would calm down, would think again and realize the absurdity of his actions. I didn't call, text, or visit my grandfather, but his image, his gentle smile, his warm eyes, and his sincere words of encouragement kept appearing in my mind. I was worried about his health. He was over 80 and had just gone through an emotional conflict with his own son. That worry tormented me every day, every hour. My creative work was also seriously affected. I couldn't concentrate on drawing. My ideas seemed to dry up, and my mood was always heavy as if I was carrying a stone. Then one late evening, about a week after my father's ban, as I sat in front of my unfinished drawing, my phone suddenly vibrated. The screen read, "Grandpa Arthur." My heart pounded in my chest. I hesitated for a long time, my hand shaking, not daring to press the answer button. I was afraid my father would find out, afraid that his anger would flare up again. But in the end, my longing, my worry, and a little curiosity won out. I took a deep breath and pressed the answer button. Hello? Grandpa? My voice was a little shaky. "Amy, my dear daughter, it's me." The grandfather's voice on the other end of the line seemed weaker than usual, a little tired but still retained the familiar clarity and warmth. "Are you okay? Your father, isn't he giving you trouble anymore?" I'm fine, Grandpa." I tried to lie, not wanting to worry him more. "Dad is probably just angry for a moment." He was silent for a moment, then continued, his voice a little more serious. "Amy, I have something important to tell you in person. Something very important. Tomorrow, around 2:00 p.m., can you come to my house? Remember to come alone. And don't tell your father about this." His secret instructions made me even more uneasy. What could be so important that he had to give such detailed instructions? The next day, I sneaked out on the early train from New York back to my hometown. I didn't tell my parents I was coming. I went straight to the old mansion at the end of a row of old oak trees where my grandfather Arthur had lived alone since my grandmother had died many years ago. My grandfather opened the door for me. He looked thinner and more tired than the last time I saw him, but his eyes were still bright and his smile was still gentle. The atmosphere in the house was quiet and a little sad, but there was also an indescribable solemnity. He led me into his private study, which was filled with old books, memorabilia, and family photos. He asked me about life in New York, about my painting, about my future plans. He listened to me, nodding and smiling now and then. Then he sighed and mentioned my father's ban. He seemed saddened by his son's actions, but he didn't seem too surprised. "Your father," he said softly, "has always been so stubborn and short-sighted. He never looked beyond his own shadow." After a few small talks and greetings, the atmosphere in the office became more serious. Grandpa looked straight into my eyes, a deep gaze containing love, trust, and a bit of solemnity. "Amy," he began, his voice slow and clear, "I have thought a lot these past days, and these past years. My life is not long. I have seen enough of the ups and downs, the joys and sorrows of this life. And I have also seen clearly the true nature of your father, his selfishness, his greed, his short-sightedness. I cannot, and will never, entrust what I have spent my whole life building, cultivating, to such a person." My heart started beating faster. I had a feeling he was about to say something very important. He paused for a moment as if to gather strength, then continued speaking, a simple sentence but with a 1,000-pound weight, a sentence that turned my entire world upside down. "Amy, my beloved daughter, the sole heir to my entire estate and legacy upon my death will be you, Amelia Hayes." I was stunned, completely stunned. My ears were ringing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The sole heir? The entire estate? I, a freelance artist who had to worry about every penny of rent, every small design contract, suddenly became the heir to a fortune I never dreamed of? Seeing my shocked expression, Grandpa smiled kindly and took my trembling hand. "I know this is a big shock to you, Amy, but this is a decision that I have considered very carefully." He began to explain. It turned out that he had secretly changed his will a few months ago, immediately after noticing the increasingly negative signs in my father's behavior, and at the same time seeing my maturity, independence, and kindness. The new will was legally notarized by his law office, and in it I was designated as the primary, almost sole beneficiary of his entire estate. Those assets include a controlling stake in the consumer goods conglomerate he founded and developed. Although he has since retired, he remains a senior advisor and holds a significant amount of stock. A portfolio of valuable stocks and bonds, several properties in major cities, including this old mansion, and a trust set up to manage part of the assets, perhaps to assist me in the early stages of a takeover or to protect the assets from potential legal disputes. As for my father, Robert Hayes, and other family members, my uncles, aunts, my grandfather's other children, they would likely receive only a very small symbolic portion of his estate, or even nothing at all. The will also contained strict provisions to prevent anyone from exploiting or undermining his legacy. "Why me, sir?" I stuttered, still in shock. Grandpa squeezed my hand. "Because you are the only one in this family who truly understands and appreciates the values I have tried to build, Amy. You have intelligence, kindness, independence, and a sensitive artistic soul. You are not blinded by money, not controlled by greed. I believe that you will know how to use this legacy wisely, meaningfully, and most importantly, you will continue to live true to yourself, pursuing your passion. That is something your father, with his nature, will never be able to do." Hearing those words, tears welled up in my eyes again, but this time not because of pain or anger, but because of emotion, because of gratitude for the boundless trust that my grandfather had placed in me. But that joy and gratitude were quickly overwhelmed by a vague anxiety. This responsibility was too great. And how would my father and the whole family react when they learned the truth? My life would certainly not be as peaceful as before. Grandpa seemed to read my mind. He patted my hand and reassured me. "Don't worry too much, Amy. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, is a very good and trustworthy person. He will support you in every legal aspect when the time comes. The most important thing I want you to remember is that this is my last wish. My love for you. Live well, be happy, and do what you think is right. That is the greatest gift you can give me." I left my grandfather's house that afternoon in a state of turmoil, a huge secret weighing on my heart. I didn't know if my grandfather would decide to reveal some part of the new will to my father, or if he would keep it a secret until the last minute. But I had a hunch that the real storm was still ahead, and my hunch was right. About a week after that secret meeting, I got a phone call from my father. This time, his voice was no longer pure anger, but a furious rage. A fury I had never heard from him. You poisonous snake! What did you do to my grandfather?" He shouted into the phone, his voice cracking. "What kind of spell did you put on him that he would do such a terrible thing? Who do you think you are to take away what belongs to me, to this family?" I was stunned. How did my father know? What did my grandfather say to him? Or was it just suspicion? "I don't understand what you're saying, Dad." I tried to stay calm. "Stop pretending to be innocent," my father roared. "I know everything. You're plotting to take over all of my grandfather's property. You're an ungrateful, unfilial daughter. I'll never let you get your way. I'll sue you. I'll do everything I can to invalidate that damn will. You won't get a penny." The curses and threats kept pouring out. I just listened silently, my heart aching. Even though I had prepared myself mentally, my father's violent reaction and harsh words still hurt me deeply. But at the same time, a strange hardness arose within me. I remembered my grandfather's words, remembered the trust he had placed in me. I could not back down. I don't know exactly what my father knew or how. Perhaps my grandfather, at some point, decided to tell a part of the truth to test his son's reaction. Or perhaps it was just the intuition of a father who felt his power and legacy were threatened by the daughter he had always despised. Whatever the reason, the real battle had begun. My father had not merely made threats, he had begun to rally other uncles and aunts in the family who might also feel that their interests were affected by the new will, to form a faction against me and perhaps my grandfather. The atmosphere in the family had become more tense and oppressive than ever. In the following months, Grandpa Arthur's health began to decline significantly, perhaps partly due to old age, partly due to the stress and sadness from family conflicts. I still secretly visited him regularly, took care of him, tried to bring him some peace and joy in his final days. Every time we met, he held my hand tightly, telling me to be strong, to be steadfast in what he had entrusted to me. Then, one cold winter morning, about 3 months after my father's angry call, I received the news that my grandfather Arthur had died peacefully in his sleep. The pain of losing my dearest friend, my only confidant in the family, overwhelmed me. But in the midst of that pain, I knew I had to pick myself up, to face what was coming. My grandfather's funeral was solemn and somewhat awkward. My father and other family members were present, but the tension and suspicious looks were still present. A few days after the funeral, Mr. Thompson, his grandfather's loyal lawyer, summoned all the family members named in the will to his office to officially announce the contents of Arthur Hayes' last will and testament. The small conference room of the law firm was stifling. My father sat in the center, his face grim and defiant. Beside him were several of my uncles and aunts who were clearly on his side. My mother sat in a corner, looking worried and scared. My younger brother, Liam, sat apart, his eyes somewhat confused and awkward. Mr. Thompson, with a calm and professional manner, began to read the will aloud. Each sentence, each word rang out clearly and firmly. And when it came to the most important part, the division of assets, the atmosphere in the room seemed to freeze. And after careful consideration, with all my mind and love, I, Arthur Hayes, do hereby give and bequeath the remainder of my entire estate, including but not limited to my shares in Hayes Industries, investment portfolios, real estate and trusts in my name, to my sole and lawful heir, my niece, Miss Amelia Hayes. A deadly silence fell over the room, then was immediately broken by my father's scream. "Impossible, this is nonsense. This is a fraud." He jumped to his feet, his face red, and pointed at Mr. Thompson. "You colluded with that girl. What kind of charm did that girl put on my father? I am his eldest son. I am the one who deserves to inherit. The curses and accusations continued. Several uncles began whispering, expressing their displeasure. Mr. Thompson remained calm, explaining that the will was perfectly legal, had been properly notarized, and reflected Arthur Hayes' final wishes. He also gently reminded that any disturbance or attempt to obstruct the execution of the will could result in legal consequences. I sat silently, trying to contain the turmoil of emotions that were rising. The pain of losing him was still there, but now it was mixed with the enormous weight of responsibility he had placed on me. I saw anger, greed, and utter disappointment in my father's eyes, in the eyes of my other relatives. But I also saw, for a brief moment, a glimmer of acceptance, however reluctant, in Liam's eyes. The reading of the will ended in chaos and bitterness. My father and his faction left angrily, not forgetting to leave behind threats of litigation. Justice for the deceased had finally been served. My grandfather's will was more than just a division of property. It was a strong affirmation of the value of true love, understanding, and trust. It was a recognition of me, the granddaughter he had always loved and trusted. And it was also a blunt rejection of my father's lifestyle, behavior, and selfish calculations. Becoming the heir to a large fortune at the age of 30, especially in this difficult situation, was no small challenge. From a freelance artist who was only familiar with paintbrushes and flying ideas, I suddenly had to face managing shares in a large corporation, learning about complex investment portfolios, and more importantly, preparing myself mentally to deal with potential legal battles from my own relatives. But I was not alone. Mr. Thompson and his team of lawyers supported me a lot in taking over the legal procedures, solving the problems that arose. I began to spend time learning, to learn about the business areas that I had never known before. I knew that I could not do everything well immediately, but I was determined not to disappoint my grandfather's trust. My relationship with my father was probably broken beyond repair. He remained hostile and tried to make things difficult, but his efforts to sue me were fruitless due to the legality of the will. As time passed, he probably realized the futility of resisting. Liam still contacts me occasionally. He no longer mentions the inheritance, just asks about my life. I sense a change in my brother's attitude, a certain respect, and perhaps even a little regret for not having had the courage to stand up for what was right sooner. I decided that I would not let this huge fortune change me. I continued to pursue my passion for art and even had better conditions to create. I established a scholarship fund in my grandfather Arthur Hayes' name to support talented but struggling young artists, just as he had done for me. As for the business assets, I hired professional managers, people with heart and vision, to run the company according to the core values that my grandfather built: integrity, innovation, and responsibility to the community. The greatest legacy my grandfather left me was not just money or real estate. It was the belief in the power of true love, understanding, and the courage to live true to yourself. My father's ban that day, which seemed like the end of our family relationship, turned out to be an unexpected door that opened a completely new destiny, an opportunity for me to not only fulfill my dream, but also continue and spread the good values that my beloved grandfather left behind.